Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Greene, co-founder of the World Science Festival with Tracy Day. Thank you. On the shoulders of giants, I think it's a quote that many of you are familiar with. It was Isaac Newton who said that if he had seen further than others, it was because he had stood on the shoulders of giants. There are giants in the world of science. Newton was one, of course, as well. There are modern-day giants of science. And what we have done for the last 3 years is give those giants of science an opportunity to take the stage and deliver their vision of some area of science. That is something we rarely do at the festival. Those of you who go to festival programs know that usually the events are a number of people guided by a moderator, carefully produced in terms of bringing a nice story of science, cutting-edge discovery to the general public. We generally don't cede the stage to people, but certain people deserve the right to say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it. And that's what this event is about. Steven Weinberg, Nobel laureate, was the inaugural address in this series. E.O. Wilson did it last year. And this year, it's Dr. James Watson, who all of you know as the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA 60 years ago. It has had a breathtaking impact on our understanding of life, on our ability to begin to manipulate life. So that is a spectacular discovery. But today he's not going to be focusing on that work. Instead, he's going to focus on what he considers his most important work since that discovery, which is his work in trying to find a cure for cancer. So it's going to be an exciting discussion, and it gives me great pleasure now to invite Dr. James Watson to the stage.
So the main topic I'll talk about will be cancer, which has sort of dominated most of my scientific life. And where I think we are finally moving almost fast. But I want to sort of put it in context of my own life and why I'm here and not someone else. Ever since I was a small boy, I believed that genes were important. Okay? And that, you know, they sort of determine, whether you can jump fast or, swear at someone fast or, a lot of things, whether you're fast or slow. So I sort of was born with genes so that I jump fast. And I react fast, So that's good. But then I want to put it then in context of my environment. Because I certainly wouldn't be here through nurture alone. I wasn't a precocious kid. No one called me a genius. Even by the time I finished college, no one thought I was going anywhere. I went to a University of Chicago fundraiser at the Rockefeller Center about, maybe 20 years ago. And so someone I remember for chiefly playing bridge, he came up to me and said, there wasn't anyone who thought you were going to be successful. And because at least at that stage of the game, I was never in the center of the room. I was more on the outside, sort of, both having nothing in common with the people inside and, being also, probably shy. Now, I grew up in the South Side, and I was born in '28. The Depression was about to start, and my father's salary was cut in half when I was, I think, 5 years old. So I grew up without a car It took an hour to reach the Chicago Loop by streetcar. And in fact, my parents only got a car in 1949. So we survived, I think, pretty well. I think there were 3 values in our house. One was just books and learning. So any spare money my father had was just going buying used books. And, you know, with time we belonged to the Book of the Month Club and the Literary Guild or something. Anyways, books were very important. Equally important, I think, was the Democratic Party. My mother was, I call her not an Irish Catholic, she was an Irish Democrat. Though she was technically a Catholic, but I mean, her chief emotion was a Democrat. And, you know, we really believed in social justice. And just know that the Republican Party would never care for social justice. I think it's just as true today. I mean, it's just remarkable. They're another species. I don't understand that. The third value in our house was birds. And that's really why I became a scientist. My father had become a very keen amateur bird watcher while in high school in LaGrange, sort of suburb of Chicago. And he continued it during a year in college, and then when he married my mother, the birding stopped, but as soon as I was sort of able to, you know, walk along with my father, he would begin taking me on bird walks. And when I was 8 years old, I was given a book called Traveling with Birds about bird migration by the curator of birds at the Field Museum in Chicago. And so this interest in natural history stayed through me in college. And increasingly became slightly, you know, scientific. Now, the second thing, which was, besides my parents, which were really, you know, I don't think I only remember, I never had an argument with my father, and only one with my mother when I ruined a pair of shoes while bird watching, you know, a new pair of shoes. You know, I shouldn't have done that. And my mother had been for 2 years at the University of Chicago, and my father had been a classmate of the University of Chicago's charismatic president, Robert Hutchins, at Oberlin. So when Hutchins set up a program called the 4-year college, which would accept you after 2 years of high school, my mother saw, I think she prepared my application and probably wrote the essay and all that stuff. Anyways, I got the scholarship, and which I always thought was due to the fact that my mother was a friend of the director of admissions. But I probably belonged there, though not initially. And the whole thing at Chicago was no textbooks, read great literature. Or great books, history and so on. And essentially, you know, no exams which depended on facts. It was all why something happened, not what happened. So why did history unfold, not what dates it occurred. So I got a totally intellectual education, somewhat dominated by, you know, philosophy, which, you know, with time I just dislike. But, you know, people say it's good training for the brain. I don't know. Anyways, you know, I could never get a good grade. Later, Chicago was always almost won the prize for the most unpleasant place to get an education. U.S. News and World Report ranked it #3 always. Now, then followed Rensselaer Polytech and Johns Hopkins. Yeah, Hopkins is supposed to be awful. And, and the two which were the most unpleasant was the Naval Academy and West Point. And then I realized what the University of Chicago was. It was Officers Training School for Future Intellectuals. And so I was really trained to get, you know, to be honest intellectually. And being honest intellectually is often confused for being unpleasant. But it seemed to me better to be unpleasant than dishonest. Or you can keep your mouth shut, but on some occasions you have to say something, I think. Anyway, I got a super education at Chicago. Luckily read during my junior year a little book called What is Life, which said that the essence of life must be an information carried in chromosomes, and somehow they didn't know what the information is, but it had to be exactly copied. And once I read that book, I just wanted to find out what the gene was. I think in part, and it proved to be the case of Francis Crick, who read the book roughly the same year I did. We had totally rejected religion. We had to have something in its place. So if God didn't make the universe or didn't create life, how did it come about? So I think that was a reason I wanted, I so dislike religion, okay? I mean the formal aspects of it, you know. It's not that, you know, I dislike ministers or anything like that, but it's just, you know, the thought that, you know, out of the sky comes rules for behavior that, you know, are correct. They're just cuckoo. So anyway, so that was part, I think, of the reason. Then the third part of my education, which was, is I went to graduate school at Indiana University. And Caltech turned me down. And I wanted to go to Caltech because I'd heard of the great Linus Pauling. But they saw my transcript and, you know, A's in ecology of grasslands or something didn't, you know, seem a proper training for a school which, you know, was going to bring together chemistry and biology and maybe even physics. Didn't know. So Indiana was then probably, I mean, people would have said it was the second best place for genetics in the United States. I think it was probably then the best because it had several Jewish refugees, and it had the great Herman Muller. It was just very good. And and it was the first time, you know, that sort of everyone I was with was very bright. That, you know, never occurred to me before. And, you know, my fellow students weren't dumb, but they had not yet, they didn't yet think like scientists. And so I had been trained in Chicago to really already think like a scientist, and, you know, it was, I think finally, you know, in Indiana, you know, I sort of realized I wasn't dumb. You know, in the sense that, you know, there had been a real prodigy in my family, Orson Welles, and I was no Orson or anything like that, you know. So, you know, I wanted to be a genius, but I knew I wasn't one. And, but people began to treat me, and I think it was because I generally knew more than other people. And that had come out of the habit of reading. And I despair of these students who spend all their time on their thesis and don't do any reading. Whereas, you got to really know something. If you're going to branch out into something new, you got to be able to say well, what people are doing now isn't really going to get anywhere. And therefore, you got to do something new. So, by the age of 20, I guess, or 21, I was already a professional scientist. I was a junior when I decided I mean, not junior, my second year at the end of it, I decided that I wouldn't continue working on bacterial viruses. I wanted to focus on DNA, and half my teachers were from Europe, and you know, Europe looked very attractive compared to, you know, the Midwest. And so I went to Cambridge. And, you know, I wanted to go to London, but, you know, what really focused me is I saw an X-ray photograph of DNA, which was crystalline, and it had a structure. If it had a structure, then you should find out what that structure is, because maybe it'll give a clue as to how it's copied, what its function is. So I wanted to go to London, but he didn't want me. And then, through help of my teachers, I got to Cambridge and met Francis Crick. And Francis and I were made for each other. I mean, he'd read Schrodinger's book. You know, intellectually, DNA was going to be more important than a protein. So, you know, DNA came first. And how would you get at the structure? I won't say that. I wrote it up in the double helix, and which is largely right, I think. So I have to point out to people that, you know, I wrote it was 12 years after the event, largely. And I never kept any notes. I had a few letters that I'd written to my parents, that's it. Francis Crick claimed he didn't have, that all his stuff had disappeared. And never thought I'd write the book anyways, but, so I wrote it. When it was finished, I knew I had a good book. Francis didn't want it published. He didn't like the sentence, the opening sentence of the book was, I've never seen Francis Crick in a modest mood. Now, you know, that was an exaggeration. But like all writing is somewhat exaggeration, but not much. Yeah, not much. If you want to say, well, what's Francis's defining characteristic, you could say immodesty or a loud voice, and they sort of go together. And so I knew I had a good book. I've been amazed, you know, that it's no, you know, called a great book. But I tried to write a great book. I mean, I think you don't get things unless you try for them. So in writing the book, I wanted to write a better book than The Great Gatsby. Yeah. So, you know, that was it. And, you know, I had a good title, Honest Jim, which then, you know, eventually got killed. But it was because Kingsley Amis said Lucky Jim. And then Conrad's Lord Jim. And I thought there should be an Honest Jim. Because, you know, and Francis said, you know, you can't, he objected to it. He said, you can't say you're telling the honest truth. So I had to tell Francis, Honest Jim is the name of a used car salesman. So from the start, I realized there was a question, should we have used other people's data? And people could take the facts and come to a conclusion that, you know, I was a perfectly normal, healthy American kid, or I was a shit. You know, from the same data, depending on their own backgrounds and, you know, what they wanted out of life. So I tried to write a great book, and it went over a period of 5 years. Now, even when I was writing it, I interested My interest in cancer goes back to '48 when my father's younger brother suddenly, who has 2 small kids, is diagnosed with melanoma and died 6 months later. And then in my original courses at Indiana, I learned about tumor viruses. And you didn't know how to think about tumor viruses until you knew what DNA was. But once we had DNA, my mind went back to tumor viruses. And I gave a course on viruses, and one night I remember thinking, viruses must carry a gene which turns on the cell cycle. So that was an idea, because it had just been shown the viruses did carry genes for enzymes, and I thought, that's it. And so if you put the viral DNA in a cell, it'll turn on the cell cycle, and you needed that to form cancer. Anyways, it was a way to start, and the viruses became very fascinating because they contained very little. Some of these little DNA viruses probably only contained 3 genes, one of which was going to be a key cancer gene. Now, this was before recombinant DNA or any other way, so about the only way you would get purified DNA was to think in terms of viruses. Now, let's see, I gotta. Okay. So that's a complicated title, more complicated, but anyways, the cancer is a little more complicated than the people who work with it want to do. Now, these are the people, these are the people I stood in the shoulders of. Luria, my PhD supervisor, Delbruck, the physicist who was the hero of Schrodinger's book, What is Life, and Al Hershey, the chemist. Really 3 super scientists. And they were, my inspiration before I went to Cambridge. And they got the Nobel Prize in 1969. So, I really came out of, good academic tradition. And Delbruck probably was the most important of them in saying I had, don't do anything that's not important. Yeah. Then there's the question, how do you know it's important? And so the answer is you try and know bright people. So when you're young, about the only way you can really know what's important is to meet bright people and find out what they think is important. I think that's the best way. You seldom get it, say, from reading the New York Times or anything like that. I mean, they trivialize most things. You never know what's important. And, but, these people thought, the gene, okay? So that was very simple. So I wrote, so for the last 5 years, I've decided I would again try and think like a scientist. I've been a writer and administrator, and the reason for it was they said I had prostate cancer, and they gave me a test, and they offered me treatments which I probably didn't need and would be very expensive, and I said no. But then I thought, well, what if I actually get cancer? What will happen? I'll die. Okay. And the reason is that most cancer remains today incurable. Okay? Period. Incurable. You may delay it by a couple of months. The hormonally controlled cancers are easier, but so I thought, well, if you looked at it, most people are studying sort of cancers before they become incurable, okay? So you give chemotherapy, they respond, and then they don't respond, okay? So you want to find out why they don't respond. Okay, so I wrote an article, I sent it to I thought, well, New England Journal of Medicine, doctors should be interested. And they wrote back saying, my paper was an idea paper and they only published facts. Yeah. which somehow said something to me about Harvard Medical School. Okay. And so then I sent it to another so-called, new journal. They didn't even send it for refereeing. I think they thought it was controversial. I think they didn't like my statements that we have further to go than we've already gone. And so Open Biology is a new journal from the Royal Society where essentially it didn't get refereed. Because the paper is filled with sort of lots of speculation. And the speculation might be wrong, and they don't want to publish anything wrong. But it's sort of my feeling that a bad idea is better than no idea. So you want to be logical with your life, okay? So now I've written a second paper, and I've sent it off after the rejection from New England Journal to Lancet. So we'll see. And the editor is said to be less doctrinaire. We'll see. Anyways, it's very speculative because it's actually more fun to be at the frontier than sort of, and I should say my ancestors are frontier people, so they were, So I'm doing a book about my father and then his ancestors. Because I sort of wondered, well, was I a mutant? I think including Francis Crick had to be a mutant. And, but now, I see my ancestors, I'm just the same. So, adventurous in some way, willing to take big chances. Okay. Okay, start out with, the fact which, why should I be interested, professionally in cancer? Because cancer is a genetic disease, okay? So cancer families, viruses which, carry genetic material, and agents which mutate genes, they cause cancer, okay? But most of our cancer is being sporadic, not being inherited. So maybe 10% of cancer is inherited. And so the big question is, what did you do if the cancer had spread to all parts of the body? And then surgery wouldn't work, and x-rays wouldn't work. And so chemotherapy came in, really with the nitrogen mustards, which came out of the war, where it was observed they had DNA damaging properties. And way back in the 50s, they began giving the mustards to children with leukemia and began to see the first remissions, not the first complete cures, but eventually they came. And Mary Lasker, who was long the most important person, proponent for medical research, and had sufficient money, so she had a lobbyist. And anyways, Mary wanted, to cure cancer see cancer cured during her lifetime, and she used Senator Kennedy to basically push her arguments in front of Congress. And this was, after the success of the first chemotherapy, so the incentive for doing it. And it was, unknown to Mary, but at the same time, those of us who were working on tumor viruses really thought we're really going to do something. And so President Nixon, not wanting Kennedy to get the credit, decided to declare war. And that was when we were still at war in Vietnam, so, it was, it turned out it was to be another war we didn't win. So as a symbol of its importance, the head of the Cancer Institute was to report to the president, not to the director of the National Institutes of Health. Mary's friend, the banker Benno Schmidt, put together a committee. I had sort of was using visible because of the double helix. I was saying this is the time to really go after cancer, and so I was put on the committee. And so the committee sort of wanted to do three things: clinical cancer centers, research centers, where you did pure research, and then comprehensive, where you did research and you had patients. And I was all for research centers and not at all for the clinic, because I didn't think we'd got that far. Anyways, I was fired. I was the only person not reappointed. Basically because, you know, I didn't see us winning a war very soon. And thought we had to get the facts. And I went to MIT and I gave a talk. And they had got a cancer research center, and I congratulated MIT for the money went to brains instead of patients. Now, that sounds, you know, uncaring, but I just thought it'd be wasted on the patients. It was my opinion we were going to, you know, need, you know, maybe 20, 30, 40 years more. But it didn't bother me because, you know, I was only 45 or something. So, you know, I could see something happening in my lifetime. Now I'm 85. I'm not interested in anything 10 years from now. So, you know, we got to cure cancer in 5 years to make me excited. Okay, so, you know, the Great War on Cancer, and there is this wonderful book that many of you must have read, The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer. It's basically all about the efforts to try and use chemotherapy to cure it. And there's some successes, but on the whole, you know, if you would go to Memorial Hospital and if you have lung cancer, you're a little better off than you were 40 years ago, but not much. You know, you might live a year longer. But then the cancer becomes resistant to the treatment. So the net effect of all this big thing was to develop drugs which killed the cancer cell. They were quite effective. But then a sort of genetic resistance develops and they no longer work. Okay. So during the time, what were two wonderful things happened scientifically. One, a technique we call it recombinant DNA. You can cut and paste DNA, and it enables gene isolation, and it enabled the development of the biotechnology industry. And it enabled really the genes which we knew that were driving cancer to be isolated. So during the basically 1980s going into the 1990s, we got the major genes that cause cancer. Okay? And it turned out to be two categories: those which drive the cancer, and then a second was mutations which inactivate the gene. And the gene had been holding the cancer. They call them tumor suppressors. So if you get rid of the suppressor, the cancer can grow. There are about 10 times as many tumor suppressors as there are the oncogenes. You make the drugs against oncogenes, okay? And then by the middle 80s, we realized that the whole DNA, human DNA, could be sequenced maybe in 15 years. And then we should be able to really see all the genes that cause cancer, not just the major ones. So I was the first head of that project. I got fired after 4 years. I didn't want to patent genes, okay? So that's in front of the Supreme Court now. Anyways, I got fired. And it had a consequence, and it'll become clear at the end, is that I had 2 jobs, and now I only had 1. So I filled up the spare time by deciding only to play tennis with pros. So I played singles tennis for pros for 20 years, and so I've had real exercise. Okay, I'll come back to that. Okay. But that was the good thing of being fired, okay? And then, you know, initially I had the support of the Assistant Secretary of Health. It really has someone who can save your ass above you. And then when that goes, you know, and, you know, I didn't mind if I offended people, because when I took over running the project, my aim was to keep the bad guys from running it, okay? So right now, you read in the newspapers, there's a brand new White House effort to map the human genome. It's filled with bad guys. There's some good people there too, but there's some real bad ones. So whoever runs it really has to get rid of the bad guys. Okay? So that's just truth in science. When you have big projects, you just can't. You got to succeed. Okay. So it's really worth having, you know, projects run by people who are really tough. You got to be fair, but you got to be tough. So this new brain one, you know, the White House should do better. So what has happened? And you read about the good news. You know, you heard on Brian Richards generally, not very good. Is that we're making tremendous progress by a new form of, we're making drugs against the proteins that drive cancer, okay? And one of these is not bad, Herceptin. The only bad thing is it costs more than anyone can afford. But it has kept some women alive. But for the most part, all these new drugs work for about a year and then they flop. And since they work such a short period of time, the people who make them have to charge large sums of money to recoup their investment. So you pay abnormally large amount of money for crummy stuff. That's today. Okay. And now, would I have used that drug that was made by a company I know and like? Yeah, I don't know. You know, 3 to 12 months. Not very good. And then the antibody, that was the idea of the wonderful Judah Folkman, if you just cut off the blood supply. And, but that only works if the chemotherapy that you're giving at the same time works. And since chemotherapy doesn't last that long, it isn't effective, this drug stops working. So on the whole, I'd say the main problem is they were never isolated to kill the cancer cell. Whereas all the original chemotherapy, the drugs you have, cisplatin and all, they were discovered because they really killed cancer cells. Whereas these new drugs block oncogenes, okay? They don't necessarily kill the cell. I don't think they're going to be our answer. There's a very intelligent man up in Boston who says if we combine 10 crappy drugs, we'll cure someone. I don't believe it. I think we need 10 good drugs simultaneously given. I mean, at least that's the way we work against bacterial infections. And they're not crappy because it's bad science or bad anything. It's just intrinsically, they don't kill the cancer cell and we're designed to do it. So there's an interesting fact, and it was sort of the fact of my one paper which I should tell you most of the cancer community doesn't agree with me on that, is that the way you kill cancer cells is you have agents which produce reactive molecules. That is, you oxidize the cancer cells, period. So like you oxidize steel, iron or something, oxidation, okay? There's oxidation and reduction. Anyways, these are agents hydrogen peroxide, we all know about that, but that's actually very effective anti-cancer agent. And that's why if you get resistant to one of them, you become resistant essentially to all of them. Now, that's an exaggeration, but it's more true than not true. And so once just shifting the drug doesn't help much, except for the company who gets money from selling it, okay? Okay, now what is resistance? Well, resistance is nothing but mutations occur in part because the chemotherapy is itself causing new mutations, which produce antioxidants, okay? So they become filled with antioxidants, they destroy the oxidants, and so the cancer cell isn't killed. Okay. So half of lung cancer and all pancreatic cancer, they're just filled with antioxidants. So there are people who believe that, that's not the true cause. But and if you write a paper about antioxidants, it very easily would be held up by a year by journals that don't like people saying antioxidants are important. Okay. And that was just some data. I hesitate to show data, but data does exist. Okay. So total antioxidant capacity, if you have a lot of that, it's going to be very hard to kill your cancer cell. And then it turns out that stem cells, which do really exist in a complicated way, are filled with antioxidants. So that's why when you often treat a cancer, the cancer will disappear, but they'll come back in the same place, say, a year later. And it's because you don't kill the stem cells. The stem cells are filled with antioxidants. And I think the reason is that the stem cells, which are you don't want them to accumulate mutations. And so if they're filled with antioxidants, there'll be less mutations. So I think, but so it's sort of pointing to, you've got to get the stem cell if your form of chemotherapy is going to work. Okay, now I'll just you can sort of see the way I'm thinking, that somehow you got to get rid of the antioxidants. But I'll go and look at it from preventing cancer from developing. So there's something, exercise. So people who exercise, and that seems to be a pretty good fact, may get as less than 30% of cancer. 30% less, okay? And then second, aspirin, that also blocks. So, and that may be 30%. And then it was noticed that people who had diabetes, who took the drug metformin, they got less cancer. And it was not because they had diabetes that they had less cancer, but the drug used to fight the diabetes, metformin, preferentially killed cancer cells. And if you look at it in the test tube, they kill stem cells. So quite a different way. I heard of that about 4 years ago, and so I've been taking, though I'm not diabetic, I've been taking metformin, a ½ gram per day, okay? And I exercise, I take aspirin, I take metformin, and I'm not fat. Okay. So if you're fat, it's about 30% more cancer, okay? Now, how does exercise work, okay? So And when I wrote the first paper, I wrote that maybe we shouldn't eat blueberries, because blueberries are rich in antioxidants. Okay? And that would, and I should say people who get radiation therapy are often told by their therapist to avoid antioxidants during the time of their therapy. So some notices, but it's not a universal thing. Okay? But the question is, does the amount of the antioxidants we get through paying something like $20 billion a year for them, do they have any effect? Okay, so I didn't know, but then someone sent me this nice little title: Antioxidants Prevent Health-Promoting Effects of Physical Exercise. And it was a gram a day of vitamin C and 400 units of vitamin E. And what the experiment was that after a month of exercise, if you add some glucose and you ask, how much does it lower, I mean, add some insulin, how much does it lower the blood glucose? And if you exercise for a month, the insulin is more effective. Even though you're healthy, the insulin works better after the exercise. Okay? Yeah, but if you take the antibiotics, it don't. Now, one of this is all people from a German diabetes clinic, and I wondered, why didn't they do an experiment with just vitamin E alone or vitamin C? I want to know what the culprit is. So I went to see C. Ronald Kahn, a very well-respected diabetes person at the Joslin Clinic at Harvard Medical School, and said, and he said, well, he submitted the paper because the lead author had been in his lab. And I said, what's the culprit, C or E? And he said, we haven't done the experiment, we're doing no more experiments. So I said to him, doesn't that really tell you that you need oxidants to prevent diabetes too? The conversation changed. So he's, one of our best medical people. I wouldn't go to see him if I were sick. But, his enthusiasms are different than mine. That's all I can say. I don't have an MD. He's respected. I'm not respected, So what am I doing talking about diabetes? So then it turns out that is there something in common about all the diseases for which the doctor tells you to exercise? Okay, so it turns out exercise is good if you have cancer. Exercise is almost obligatory if you have diabetes. Exercise certainly slows down the appearance of Alzheimer's. And you can't have a heart attack without them telling you to get back or start exercising. Okay? So then it turns out that they have something in common. Metformin may work on all of them. So they're beginning to use metformin on the Alzheimer's, and I will admit it's not done well enough, and there are people who treat heart failure with metformin. So my guess is that all of these, the best way of looking at it is, and so what did the oxidants do? And so in the literature, they talk about in diabetes and lots of diseases, unfolded proteins, as if the proteins haven't folded up correctly. And so I have proposed, that maybe it's right or wrong, that oxidation, the oxidants, are there to form the disulfide bonds of the secreted proteins. So essentially, if you don't have oxidants, you'll have a lot of crappy proteins. Okay? So if your proteins are crappy, maybe you won't feel very well. Okay? And yeah, certainly diabetes too has so many complications. All right. So then that really leads to the question, you know, are really antioxidant supplements one reason for our sort of epidemics of diabetes and Alzheimer's? Now we ascribe it all to being fat. So it could be. But I suspect the antioxidants. Then the question is, who's going to pay the money to find out whether blueberries are safe? Well, it's unlikely Mayor Bloomberg. Okay. But I'm more hopeful of Richard Branson, because he really believes in exercise, and I've told him that we really should begin to, because, you know, exercise clearly does prevent disease, but should you exercise every day? Should you you know, do you have to make your heart twit? Or, you know, how much exercise is good, and could there be too much exercise and so on? And, you know, I wouldn't trust, you know, your basketball coach to be a fair judge. And so you need someone impartial who doesn't have any vested interest in it. So I can't think of anyone except, you know, a hedge fund billionaire, trillionaire. But it may be an important issue. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so this is sort of my talk. The cancer. It's too technical to go in. Metformin, we really got to find out how it acts much better, because it seems to prevent a lot of cancer among people who are diabetic and are taking it, but it so far hasn't yet been demonstrated to be a good drug just to take if you have cancer. And we think we know partly why, but, you know, I'm far from sure that's right. But I think even with, you know, if you say you've got only 5 years, we can get a long ways. I've totally avoided talking about vaccines against cancer, which you undoubtedly have read about, and which now increasingly look like they may work. There are two different vaccines. If you combine them, it looks like the sum of them. And they seem to be working against melanoma. So there may be a way completely different from the way I'm thinking, by which a lot of cancer can be stopped. And I've written it, and the Herald doesn't like it. I think we'd actually benefit from having a general in charge and saying things are more important than others. Harold says he's in charge, but I don't believe it. I mean, he's very bright, but not as bright as I am. No, I say this because you've got to have self-confidence. You know, when someone disagrees with you, you don't just wilt. Yeah. So it is important to sort of know when you're brighter than someone else and you can forget what they say. All right, with that, I'll take a few questions.
Why are antioxidants so good? Like, I know you're talking about them being
I'm saying they're so bad.
I know, but why? Sorry,
why
are they perceived as good to the outside world?
Because Linus Pauling took them and wrote a book, and orthomolecular therapy, oh, wacko. You know, he popularized them, and, you know, the truth is that oxidation sounds bad, okay?
Thank you.
And, you know, it rusts you, or you might, you know, so antioxidant. And people are, you know, desperate to feel better. You know, there's so many reasons to feel crappy. And so you take something, but you know, I find that every time I tell someone that antioxidants don't work, they wish I hadn't said it. So it's not a popular message. Yeah, but so the truth is, you know, I still drink a lot of orange juice because I like orange juice. But I really avoid vitamin E. That's bad. And it's not, and that's why I'm annoyed at this, you know, man up in Boston who doesn't feel, you know, having published a paper with mixed vitamin C and E, why they don't go ahead and find out which one is bad. That's why I'm mad at him. You know, he's not, I have no reason to believe he's not a professional good doctor or anything, but I'm just pissed off.
Low levels of vitamin D have been linked in research to type 1 diabetes and other health concerns. I just wanted to know if you have any.
They're not an antioxidant.
Right.
Okay, that's all. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned bad guys on the Genome Project. Why are they bad? What are they doing that's bad? Whatever it is, I believe you.
The experiments they propose won't give you, you know, won't push you ahead. That's all. When I say they're bad, you know, they're not bad like outlaws, but you don't want them to control the money. They'll pass the money out to people who will never finish the project.
Speedy, you used the word Genome Project. You were talking about, you meant to say the brain project.
No, I can't. I can't hear my wife, but.
Do they have motivation?
No. What I'm trying to say in science, everyone's not equal. There's some people who really see the future. There are other people who have techniques which they've invented, they like them, but they're not going to get you the answer, and I didn't want to give them any money. That's what I mean by bad guys. Okay. And you could have at that time, though it's not true now, you could have just said, I went on the project so that NIH controlled it and not the Department of Energy. So the bad guys then were the Department of Energy. Actually, the Department of Energy is reformed, and it might actually be better now than NIH. So it's not permanently bad, but I'm saying way back in 1986, I didn't really trust the Department of Energy.
My question is, do you see with the advancement of technology, you know, 3D printing, do you believe that in the future the cure of cancer will be done with 3D printing or with another advancement of technology? Besides presenting from vaccines or trying to find a cure for it?
No, I think, you know, if I was running, you know, someone gave me $1 billion, you know, we might have 1 or 2 good drugs in 5 years that really cure. But I would go toward drugs that kill stem cells. We're not going to stem cells now, that's all. I'm just trying to say we're just, you know. And why are we not going to stem cells?
Do you believe more?
I wouldn't do it the way most people are doing it, but you know, most of my life is, you know, I've been very lucky. I've been generally part of groups of people who are very intelligent and, you know, really were science at its best. When you move into the medical field, it's a little scary.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. Do you have any sense or opinion on a relationship between all the microwave energy and cell phones and cancer?
None. I think, you know, from what I believe, really, I wouldn't worry at all. You know, I worry about the Tea Party or something, but you know.
First of all, I think the young lady in the audience was saying that you were saying that there are bad people in the brain program, not in the human genome program. But my question is you said you have drugs that target oncogenes. Is that specifically to cancer cells, or is that all cells?
You know, the drugs we've isolated, you try and make them selective, so they kill cancer cells and don't kill normal cells. So there is a unique biochemistry to the cancer cell, probably to almost all of them. And that was discovered by Otto Warburg back in 1924. So, you know, every good biochemist in the 40s was trying to, you know, understand the Warburg effect. We're just now going back to it. The trouble is we've put almost all our resources toward DNA, and there are very few decent biochemists. So, you know, we've sort of forgotten biochemistry in favor of DNA, and, you know, the people think you just sequence a tumor. Here's a big step forward. No. You know, I wish it was, but it isn't. We really have to, I think, focus on the biochemistry. There's just cancer cells really need fat being made. They've got an interesting thing. So I think with better biochemistry and, you know, just, you know, I sense the cancer community is largely filled with people who've given up hope about 30 years ago. You know, it didn't work, and so, you know, they take this, but, I mean, Crick and I, you know, won the DNA thing because, boy, we wanted to win. It really helps to want to win. So, you know, and so not only do you want to win, you got to think you're going to win. Okay, so which means you know, yeah.
To give a short answer on how you can target cancer, if it's long, then don't worry.
No, I mean, I would target the stem cell. I'm just trying, you know, to give a simple thing that if you don't get the stem cell, you're in shit. Okay.
I guess my question is about being an informed patient. Given your perspective on medicine today, it sounds like you take vitamin E. You have, but the
I don't take vitamin E. No. I take vitamin D. Yeah, vitamin D.
I meant D.
I don't take vitamin A. That's bad stuff.
You said you listened to your doctor with respect to vitamin D. I mean, the question I have is how does one become a sufficiently informed patient to be able to question the medical community?
There's no way. No way.
So you then have to listen.
No, because no one knows the truth. That's the problem. Is if you know you really, if we really, nutrition was.
What do you do? You're following to certain things.
Well, right now I'm on a protein diet. Basically, avoid sugar, avoid carbohydrates, which fits in, and you know, it fits in with people who like meat and fish.
Consistent with knowledge.
No, you could, you know, hopefully we will get to the point where nutrition becomes a science. And, you know, we'll know because, you know, are there two types of fat? Yes, there are, but, you know, should I eat bacon or not eat bacon? And, you know, you can hear every answer you want, so I eat it. You know, so, you know, it's just very hard to, in the absence of knowledge. And so, but, you know, on a sort of priority of people, you know, no one has ever associated, you know, good science with nutrition. I mean, that food pyramid. Oh, that's just a scandal, and that comes out of, you know, the Department of Agriculture, which is selling, you know, one's food. But I mean, it's awful. I mean, just you know.
So you're saying one should not listen to one's doctor. I mean, that's.
Should what?
One should not listen to one's doctor because what the doctor says he's not working with. I mean, this is not. I'm not.
I mean, blueberry pie tastes very good.
Excuse me?
Blueberry pie tastes good. So look, I'm being flippant because we don't know. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say. I wish we did. But, you know, generally I think, you know, stay away from starch. Okay.
All right, everyone, let's please thank Dr. Watson again. Thank you.
in about a second. There are 400,000 trillions upon trillions of similar journeys that happen each and every